Dhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. This morning I'll address a query from a relatively new devotee, although I think there's always something a little strange about that, saying new devotee. You say new devotee, but as Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur pointed out, that you can't convert someone to be a devotee because everyone is a devotee. We talk about religious conversion. And in terms of worldly perspective, it appears that people are converted into being devotees, but actually we understand that everyone is a devotee. Anyway, it's a query from a new devotee, as we say conventionally, who had taken a lot of trouble over several months to bring a friend of his into, or at least close to, Krishna consciousness. And what happened is that this friend of his, after showing some serious interest in Krishna consciousness for some time, now appears to be receding away from Krishna consciousness. So the question is that, well, if someone, referring to his friend who's intelligent and a truth seeker, if even such a person, having come close to Krishna consciousness, doesn't get it, then what hope is there for others? So let's address this. Now, often we expect that when people are subjected or they come in contact with Krishna consciousness, that they should take it up immediately, which makes sense, actually. Srila Prabhupada said, anyone who reads Krishna book will become a devotee. Remember reading that? Anyone who reads this book they're certain to become a devotee. Go distribute those Krishna books. Doesn't mean they'll become a devotee overnight on the spot, but by practical experience we see that people don't become overnight on the spot. But even by reading it, actually, I mean, even to read the whole book means you have to be somewhat of a devotee even to do that. Scholars of religion, there's one class of people in this world who are wasting their time. They should become, academic scholars who, like some people study butterflies and they study religion. For them, instead of being religious, they study religious people. They may be religious themselves also. Anyway, they analyze that, or studies of psychology, students of psychology maybe more, the varieties of religious experience. That book was by who? Skinner? I can't remember. Anyway, they talk about the conversion experience, that it's a common phenomenon that someone, all of a sudden, boom, their whole way of thinking changes, and they're convinced that this religion, it's the thing, it's the truth. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In Christian mythology, there's the famous experience of Saul, who was a Roman centurion, means a a low-level leader in the Roman army who was marching to Jerusalem after the whatever it was of Jesus. He wasn't around anymore. Maybe he went to Kashmir, or maybe he went to heaven, or whatever. So Saul was marching to Rome to kill off all those nasty Christians, when all of a sudden he fell off his horse, and there was I can't remember the story exactly. There was a shaft of light, and a sound came down that, "Saul, why are you harassing me?" And then he got initiated by God on the spot, and his name was changed to Paul. And he became Paul, and he became the main leader of the Christians after Christ. And some people, they call Christianity Paulianity, because he actually changed all the teachings, more or less, of Christ and set up his own ideas. Anyway, that's a famous conversion experience. That's one way people come to Krishna consciousness also. That all of a sudden, it's boom, everything fits into place mentally. Their confused state, or whatever state they were in previously, changes, and they think, this is it. Another way that people take to Krishna consciousness, or maybe any other religious path, if you want to psychologically analyze Krishna consciousness, is a gradual process. They gradually come in contact, and then they like it, and then they start coming a bit more, and then they like it some more, and they start chanting one round, and then, come on, why don't you do 2? Okay. And then, bump them up to 4, and then gradually ratcheting them up, and then they get up to 16. Whew, we hope. So that's another way. Another way is to be born into the culture. If you're a child of practicing devotees and you take it up yourself, many children born of devotees, they're not that much into Krishna consciousness, but some are. So these are, it would seem, 3 main ways of taking to Krishna consciousness. Or in the case of the children, they don't really take to it, they're born into it. Can you think of any others? I couldn't think of any, just on the spot. So, those who are newly converted, they tend to think that, well, everyone should be like that. I mean, it's so clear and obvious and true and wonderful and great that surely anyone who comes in contact with this will accept it, because it seems to them that it's so obviously right that everyone should take to it. I remember when Jimmy Carter was the president of America, I think it was during his presidency or just after, his mother came to India and she stayed in ISKCON Juhu, and she read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, and then devotees saying, well, did she become a devotee? They thought, by reading Bhagavad Gita as it is, she should immediately become a devotee of Krishna. Well, she didn't. She's probably dead by now, and it's about time for Jimmy Carter to... I don't wish him to die, but he's pretty old by now, so presumably his mother may or may not be around, but she didn't, it seems, take to Krishna consciousness very seriously. So, preaching Krishna consciousness means we have to try hard. Srila Prabhupada said, actually Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, it may be a Bengali saying, I don't know, or converted from a Bengali saying, that we have to spend gallons of blood to make one person. Gallons of blood. You know what a gallon is? Gallon's about, 5 liters? Something like that. Gallons of blood to make people, to bring people into Krishna consciousness. Is that Do you have any saying like that? In Hindi, Gujarati? No, you don't know any saying like that. Another saying of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is that even at the expense of all my mats and all my properties, if I could make one person Krishna conscious, I would consider my mission successful. And you see that many people we preach to, they don't catch it. Even people, sometimes people we're preaching to for some time and they seem to be quite interested, but they never take it up very seriously. And then sometimes people just come, we never saw them before, and they just take it up immediately. Or someone we don't expect, like, there might be a group of students you're preaching to, and a few of them seem very interested, and someone else just seems to be interested in the prasadam, and then it may be someone who doesn't seem very interested takes it up very seriously, whereas the others who did seem very serious, they don't take it up seriously. Often our experience in the West, when we used to distribute, when lots of books and book distribution was the center of all our activities, as Prabhupada said, in the Krishna conscious movement, the distribution of books is the center of all our activities. So we found that even without an effort to make people come to Krishna consciousness other than distributing books, that people would come and join if we distributed books. They just come. We don't know where they came from. They just arrived and said, "Hey, shave me up." When I was allowed to join this movement, I was the first, it seems, in the whole of Britain for 5 months. They'd stopped distributing books. They weren't distributing any books at that time. They were distributing records to try to cover up some debts that had been incurred. And then shortly after I joined, there was almost a rebellion from all the brahmacharis. He said, "We want to distribute books. We're fed up of distributing these records," even though they were Hare Krishna records. Records, previous. Now we have CDs, and before that were cassettes, and before that were records. You might see in a museum such a thing. So then, despite the GBC telling us that, book distribution is Maya, and reading books is Maya, I was an unusual GBC member. The brahmacharis all started distributing books, and what do you know? People started joining. So Krishna's mercy is obviously a major factor there. Now, talking about intelligent people, so you're saying there's I brought one intelligent person. But it's not simply by... Well, first of all, one thing to understand is that in Kali Yuga, what we call intelligent is not intelligent anyway. And even people are intelligent, they're intelligent for all the wrong things. Like some people are very intelligent how to make cartoons. So, what's the value of that? Or some people are very intelligent for how to seduce women, how to make money, and all these things. So, real intelligence means Brahma Jigyasa, to inquire into the nature of ultimate reality. So, even those who do make some inquiry, we have to understand that in the modern age our intelligence is very poor, and even in previous ages, Manushanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhi yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mang veti tatvata. Out of many thousands of persons, hardly one tries for perfection, and out of those who have achieved some kind of perfection, hardly one knows me, Krishna, who's the supreme absolute truth. Hardly one knows me in truth. So, truth seekers, it's not just in this age, where anyway not many people are seeking the truth, and on top of that, people are less intelligent. But even in other ages, and again, Bahunam Jandanamante Jnanavan Mang Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha. Jnanavan, those who have achieved some level of truth, which corresponds with those who have achieved perfection at some level. That's in the same chapter. That Manushanam verse comes near the beginning, 3rd verse of the 7th chapter, and Bahunam Janmanamante, that's the 19th verse, I believe. So it's almost saying the same thing. It may take them many births. Now, why, if people seek the truth, don't they get it? If you're really looking for the truth, why is it that you just, why don't you get it? What's the problem? Well, there may be various reasons for that. One reason is that not every truth seeker is actually a truth seeker. Not that everyone... I mean, really, if you're seeking the truth, you have to be... Vyavasayatmika buddhi. You have to be really fixed on it. You can't seek the truth in between cocktails, which is a mixture of alcohol and different other... It's a sense gratification drink. You're lucky if you don't know what a cocktail is, but those of us who are born in the Western world, we know all these things. In between chasing women, or even if you desire to have a comfortable life, one must be prepared to sacrifice everything to seek the truth. Krishna says, Savadhaman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. There's no in between 90%, 99%, one for Krishna, two for me kind of thing. You know, go collecting for Krishna, and people give you a donation, and then this much for Krishna. Anyway, he's got so much, so I need some for myself also. So Krishna says, Yoga Kshemam Vahami Aham. Why should I put into all the trouble? I'll just pocket the collection myself. And it's also a service to Krishna, so he doesn't have to bother looking after me. So this kind of attitude won't help us in advancing toward Krishna. We have to be actually very, very serious. Now, another thing is that when we come to seek the truth, we are from the beginning hampered because we don't know what it is. We start off in the position of ignorance. Now, how are you going to find the truth with your ignorance? And we have so many we have our own way of thinking. So even when we start to think about the truth, we have some preconception of what we think it should be. And then we're looking for something that matches that preconception, but we don't actually know what the truth is. And preconception means misconception. We may try to think of spiritual life in terms of what we already have experience of, but all our experiences are material. So, for instance, if we think of spiritual, we may think, well, it's just this is a common misconception. It's a negation of the material. That spiritual means there's nothing. There's just nothing. That's all. Or if we perceive that in material life there's bad feeling, so we may think that spiritual means just having good feeling, universal love, something like this, without having a clear understanding of what spirit is. Therefore we find in the Bhagavad Gita the first teaching is to distinguish spirit from matter. There's no question of spiritual life unless we know what spirit is. Or another common misconception is to think of God, but then to think of God in material terms, that God is like our kind Father, so He makes all arrangements for our sense gratification. We're good children, we do what He says, and then He rewards us by giving us sense gratification. So these are various misconceptions that we can fall into. So, who can take to Krishna consciousness? Yeshang tvantagatang papang jananang punya karmanam te dvanva moha nirmukta bhajanti mang duravrataha. One can take up Krishna consciousness very seriously if one is, one of the conditions there is dvanva moha, being free, nirmukta, being free from the dualities of, for instance, happiness and distress. We tend to judge happiness and distress in terms of our mental and bodily condition. But Krishna consciousness is beyond that. Though, without caring for our mental or bodily situation, if we simply try to satisfy Krishna. But how will we know of Krishna? That Krishna is the supreme truth. Therefore, to go beyond this dvandva, this duality of happiness and distress, without being in Krishna consciousness, without understanding Krishna, then how can we know what is beyond happiness and distress? We can only gravitate toward an impersonal kind of understanding. Wherever there's no actual meaning in life, in this material world, I mean, fully no meaning. There's no this Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya concept of the Mayavadis, that the Brahma is spiritual and that's indefinable according to them, and this whole world is false. So we can only get beyond the dualities without understanding Krishna and our relationship with Krishna. Then if we think of becoming free from the dualities of happiness and distress, we can only do that by considering this world false, that it has no meaning whatsoever. But the Krishna conscious perspective is quite different. And one who's acted piously in previous lives, who will even begin to recognize Krishna? Someone who's had contact with Krishna consciousness previously, this previous Sukriti. Generally such people will take to Krishna consciousness. And on top of all that, the mercy has to come down. Brahmanda Brahmite Kono Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. On top of all that, unless we get Krishna's mercy in the form of the seed of devotion being planted in our heart by the Krishna conscious gurus, then again we won't take to Krishna consciousness. So it seems like there's not much hope. Well, there is, by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But at the same time, it's not a mechanical formula that someone seems to be coming to Krishna consciousness, but they don't make it. They're coming up. They seem to be doing quite well, and then they just revert back to their old way. Why should that be? Well, before I deal with that, let's deal with someone who's seeking the truth. Even if someone's seeking the truth and they come in contact with Krishna consciousness, they might not get it. And I'll give an example of that. A lot depends on how we deal with them also. If we don't deal with them in a very Krishna conscious way, then they may not be able to recognize Krishna consciousness. And as being the truth, which the nectar for which we're always hankering, birth after birth. I'll give an example of that. This is from the early 1980s. When I was in Dhaka in Bangladesh. One British man, young man, came, somehow or other he found out about us in our little house there. We were like semi-underground, or more than semi-underground, it being a Muslim country in which our devotees had previously been told to leave. So he found out about that, and it seemed he'd come to Bangladesh with some charity mission or something like this, not religious. And he said, I want to find out, what's the real truth? I mean, what better candidate could there be than this? So the devotees who were with me, they said, let's not be very heavy with him. Let's just present Krishna consciousness to him in a relaxed manner. And, let him decide for himself, like that. So I wasn't much into it, but I went along with them. And they were very relaxed, these devotees. They were like lying back and talking with him in a very casual manner. And they presented, and whenever I tried to, say something Krishna conscious, directly Krishna conscious, they'd restrain me. So their approach was take it or leave it. And when he left, I gave him one of Prabhupada's books, Bhagavad Gita as it is. That's let Prabhupada speak to him. And then I went out traveling and preaching. And I came back after some days and I asked, well, what happened to that man? And they said, well, he came back after a few days and he returned the Bhagavad Gita to us and said he'd met some Christians and he'd become a Christian. So I thought, because they'd made it a take it or leave it approach, he was ready to take it, but we didn't give it. And we made it so casual, like, well, you can take it or not take it. It's like it's not that important. It's not vital. And that wasn't what he was looking for. He was looking for being told, this is it. And so he took up Christianity, who they would have told him immediately that this is, this is it. So they may be seeking for truth, but the devotees have to do their job also. Of course, there are different kinds of people. For some people, if you tell them this is it, they'll say, I don't want that. Everyone says that. I don't. It's just, I don't want this kind of fanatical approach. But other people, if you just present things to them in a very reasonable way, like a logical kind of way, that might not be the best way to present it to them. Recently in America, I was in a university program and I gave what you might call a very logical, reasonable, philosophical approach or understanding. Then after the lecture, seeing the feedback, the way the people were asking questions and this and that, I understood they were actually much less skeptical than I'd presumed them to be. I could have given, like a straight thing. This is it. You got to surrender to Christ. Maybe not, like I did. But I could have given it would have probably been more effective if I'd have told them that in this Kali Yuga, the only way is chanting the holy names, and this. It probably would have been more effective. But I wasn't, I wasn't clued into my audience, so to speak. So maybe if I spend more time in America, I could be more clued into the audience. But we have to do our job and deliver Krishna consciousness. If we, just like, for instance, there may be some people who come to our temples for years, and the devotees just keep them on the stage of giving donations because they think, it's giving donations. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. But the fact that they could actually chant Hare Krishna and surrender to Krishna, they may not even want them to, because if they become a devotee, then they might give their money to something else, something not that we don't want them to, or something. I don't know what the mentality is. So we have to do our job properly, and even if they take to Krishna consciousness, people need a lot of guidance. We can't think that, well, they've already come so... now they're a devotee. Okay, finished. Job finished. But we have to go on day after day. Day after day. With our sadhana, seeing everyone's fixed in following the practices of Krishna consciousness. Because even if... and of course, especially in the very beginning stages, it's like when someone moves into a temple and then, it's a big change for them. And they need, especially in the first few days while they're adjusting, and it's like we can expect Maya to attack them more, and all of a sudden they have to get up early in the morning, and they don't have any independence. They can't run around here and there, wherever they like, whenever they like, however they like. So, of course, often nowadays we train people a bit before they join, but especially in the beginning, people need lots of guidance, and Maya will attack prakshematmika vritti. She has a general avaranatmika vritti by which she covers everyone. And then when someone tries to come out of Maya, then she has her special kick them back phase. So that's always there. And therefore we have to, Prabhupada emphasized so many times that we have to have regular hearing, classes, sadhana, kirtans, all these things. These things will help to keep us fixed. But even with all these things, we see that someone, even after many years in Krishna consciousness, may go away or they may deviate. So what should we all do? Simply, close the shop and give up. And what should we do? Go back and join a software company or something? If I was to join a software company, I think the only job I could get would be cleaning the toilets. I don't have any. What is your qualification? I don't have any qualification. So, don't have any university degree. So, what is the hope? The hope is very good, but we have to stay on the path. That's all. And pray. Prarthana karoye shadana ro tamadas. We always have to pray for the mercy of Hari, Guru and Vaishnava, and understand what is the right path and stick to it. Just like I remember when the last major guru fall out in our movement, and people say, well, we could have never imagined he would go away, but well, for me it wasn't such a surprise, because he never used to get up in the morning and didn't go to the temple program, and what do you expect? Krishna consciousness is a science. That means if we follow it, we can expect to get the result. And if we don't follow, then we'll get a different result. That's all. So, truth seekers, yes, you're all truth seekers. You came here, or even if people, they may not be truth seekers, but they may be fortunate enough that the truth finds them. So, one way or the other, we're very, very fortunate to be here, and let's stay. Let's stay in the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet, which means in the shelter of his instructions. Whatever may happen. It's a very difficult world in so many ways. And even within our society, there may be so many different opinions and ups and downs, but let us stick to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada and pray that others may come also. And by the grace of Krishna, in this country, nowadays more and more people are taking to Krishna consciousness, taking interest in that, which I attribute largely to the widespread distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books all these years. Actually, that's been a major factor. And those major temples that Prabhupada built, that's also a major. There are various factors. So, anyway, there are a few thoughts about truth seekers. Any questions about this? Yes.
Some new devotees come to Islam. Already seen many Bhagavad. They have many philosophies
You're saying that the people who come to ISKCON, they have many bogus ideas before they come. Well, that's normal. Everyone in this world has bogus ideas.
But after coming to us,
After coming,
they are confusing us. Means they are saying some other philosophy and other slogas also, like this usually Brahma Satya
Brahma Satyam
Jagan.
Jagan Mithya. Yes, this Sanskrit phrase appears several times in Prabhupada's books, but it's not our philosophy. Prabhupada quotes it as it encapsulates the Mayavad philosophy, which is bogus. So Prabhupada quotes it because it's a major misconception and it's bogus, and Prabhupada quotes it to refute it. But you have met some devotees who quote it as if it's a fact? Is it? It's a new one for me. I didn't get that one yet. It wouldn't be a surprise, but I didn't meet anyone within ISKCON quoting that as if it's a fact. I have had the experience, I mentioned that fairly recently, of visiting one Gauriya Math once, and I was in the room of a sannyasi, and this is in Calcutta, Behala, South Calcutta. So, in his room he had a photo of Vivekananda. So I said to him, "What's this?" He said, "Vivekananda." "Yeah, but I said, he's completely bogus." He said, No, he's a great person. Don't you know, he went to the World Parliament of Religions. And I thought, ooh, these are supposed to be followers of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. They're sannyasi, and he's completely confused. I mean, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he chose to be enemies of pretty much everyone in the world, but among the top people he was against was Vivekananda. Prabhupada also is very much against. So, anything's possible.
These are in Shastras.
What's in Shastra?
This
No, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya is the saying of Shankaracharya. That's not Shastra. It's in Sanskrit. That doesn't mean that, there may be so many bogus things in Sanskrit. Just because it's in Sanskrit doesn't mean that it's authorized Shastra. Even some things in Shastra, they're bogus. Even some things in the Srimad Bhagavatam are bogus. Even some of the things Krishna says are bogus. Now you're really looking shocked. You're going to shoot me? In Bhagavatam we find Krishna speaking Karma Mimamsa philosophy to Nanda Maharaj, to convince Nanda Maharaj not to perform the Indra Yagya. So, on the basis of the Siddhanta of Shastra, the Vaishnavacharyas, they recognize that what Krishna is saying there is not to be accepted as bona fide. It's bogus. So there you go. You have to understand Shastra through the Acharyas. The whole avatar of Krishna, Buddha, everything he spoke was bogus. Not everything, but most of it. His philosophy is bogus. He came with a certain point. That Sadaya Hridaya, what is that? Sadaya Hridaya Darshita Pashughatam. He was merciful upon the animals that were being slaughtered. Therefore he spoke this whole bogus philosophy just to stop people killing animals. He spoke against the Vedas. Nindasi yagya vidher ahaha shruti jatam. In the Shruti, in the Vedas, it recommends animal sacrifices. To stop that, he spoke against the Vedas. So we have to understand Shastra through the Siddhanta and the Acharyas. That was a shock, wasn't it, when I said Srimad Bhagavatam, the bogus things in there. What Krishna says is bogus. Well, there you are. On the other hand, we find very good instruction in Srimad Bhagavatam from Hiranyakashipu. He gives good instruction at some point on the nature of the soul. Right? You read that in the 7th canto? After the death of Hiranyaksha.
Another Bhagavad Gita, Krishna forces means he is emphasizing to surrender unto him. But in another way, when he was a grihastha, but he performed many yajnas.
Krishna, it says, to surrender to me, and himself he performs what appears to be karma kandya activities before in his grihastha life, before and after the battle of Kurukshetra. How do we understand this? Krishna setting an example for there are two things. One thing is Krishna setting an example for the less intelligent people. Na buddhi bedam janayat, that verse is there. Don't disturb the minds of people who are attached to these activities, because for them on their level it's good. In another way, this can also be done in Krishna consciousness. Arjuna was also worshipping different demigods, but the comment is there in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Uddhava was better than Arjuna because he didn't worship different demigods. Krishna, after speaking the whole Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, I surrender to you, and at least the version we have in the Mahabharata is that right after that, Krishna had Arjuna recite a prayer to Chandi. Chandi means Durga. So how do you understand that? Well, Madhvacharya says Mahabharata is ati prakshipt, means there's a lot of interpolation, and that's one way to explain away things which don't seem to fit. Another thing is, just like, there's questions, I'm on email, there's questions coming up of doing Bhumi Puja and all this, and the local people, they do it for the demigods. Well, we also take cognition of the different demigods, and if we're in this world, to some extent we do. Just like in Udupi, there's that Goshala was made just outside, right in front of Krishna Mat. It was recently built. And they have to do regular Naga Puja there, because that land belongs to the Nagas. So they're doing that in the service of Krishna. You could, of course, the Madhva approach is like that. They do incorporate worship of demigods. It's quite acceptable. But seeing them within the Madhva system, that's quite acceptable. But seeing the demigods as great devotees of Krishna, right in front of the Krishna Matam. Just out in the front is the temple of Subramanyam, who they worship as a great devotee. And they have the Navagraha also, those two temples just on the side. So it's not wholly outside the scope of Krishna consciousness to worship demigods or to recognize them. In fact, we should do to some extent, because if we don't, that's also another kind of offense. If we don't recognize that the demigods are there and they're representatives of Krishna. But on the other hand, we worship Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, within the Gauriya system, we don't regularly worship demigods. Under the understanding, what's the understanding? Yatha toror mula nishechenena tripyanti tat skandha bhujopashaka pranopaharachcha yatindriyanam sarva. What is it? Tataiva sarvahanam achyuteja. That just like by giving water to the root of the tree, all the trunk, the leaves, the branches, the twigs, the flowers, the fruits are all nourished. By supplying food to the stomach, the whole body is nourished. So in this understanding, we don't regularly worship demigods, although we may do on certain occasion. We're not wholly against it. Following Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's example, if we're in an area and there's a demigod temple, we'll go and offer our respect like that. Krishna regularly worshipped demigods. Yeah, he was setting the example of a Vedic householder, you could say. So for persons who are not purely in Krishna consciousness, that's good for them. If you have to worship someone. If you don't worship Krishna, you don't worship demigods, then you'll worship these dogs. That's the tendency, to worship someone. And we may also do. In fact, we do. In traditional Vedic culture, there are so many things. Sleeping with your head toward one direction, eating in a certain direction. It's all in relation to the demigods and acknowledging their influence, like that. But on the other hand, I tell you, Prabhupada, he didn't make that much. He would sleep with his head to the east or the south. But he didn't emphasize these things so much. Still, we should follow as much as we can.
Those who are not Krishna consciousness, they can worship demigods.
Those who are not in Krishna consciousness, should they worship demigods? We don't encourage anyone to worship demigods. We encourage everyone to worship Krishna. But there are different levels also. It's just like people are not in Krishna consciousness. Some are vegetarian, some are not vegetarian. Those who are vegetarian, they're also not in Krishna consciousness, but they're in that respect they're better situated than those who are meat eaters. Or it may be that in some case a meat eater is better situated than a vegetarian. For instance, a Vedic Kshatriya who occasionally eats meat and who is, especially if he's dedicated to Krishna, is in a better situation than a Buddhist vegetarian. All these, but by far the best position is a fully surrendered devotee of Krishna.
If you fully convince only Krishna we can worship, it is not necessary to do Bhumi Puja.
If we're fully convinced that Krishna is all in all, is it not necessary to do Bhumi Puja? Well, it's not really necessary to do anything but chant Hare Krishna. But if we're going to build a temple, then we'll acknowledge that the temple is standing by the mercy of Balaram. So we put that little deity of Anantashesh in the ground, as Prabhupada did when he did the Bhumi Puja in Mayapur for the great temple. But generally people do that with acknowledgement to the demigods and this and that. But we do it in a Krishna conscious way. That's all. Bhumi Puja.
It seems that Prabhupada liked Krishna book most.
It seems that Prabhupada liked Krishna book most. Seems like it. He was very fond of that, yes. What to say? Prabhupada, he was... In his preaching, he mostly quoted Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada loved Krishna. So Krishna is Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna is Bhagavad Gita. You had a question? Oh, you forgot it now. You raised your hand? No? All right, then you still have a question.
Sometimes we see that some devotees practicing for some time, still they don't have as much faith. Some new devotees can have so much faith, like this yesterday para bhakti.
Yeah. Someone comes after many years, they still don't seem to have much faith or commitment, whereas newer devotees may have more faith and commitment. Yasya deve para bhakti yata. What is that? Yata. Bhavate yata deve tata garo tasyaite katita hyarta prakashante mahatmana. How can we develop such faith? It's one of those, how can we be sincere? How can we be determined? How can we? Well, the answer to all these questions is, well, to a large extent it's up to you. And in general, whatever quality we want to develop, if we associate with others who have that quality, that will be helpful for us. If we pray to Krishna, that will help us. If we meditate on that quality as it's personified in various devotees, that will help us. Just like I was given the example the other day, the 4 devotees who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught different principles through. I forgot one. Sanatana Goswami was humility, Haridas Thakur was forbearance, Ramananda Rai was conquering Cupid, and the 4th, which I forgot that day, was Damodar Pandit, constructive criticism. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught these principles, these 4 important principles through 4 devotees. So we can meditate on these devotees and pray for their mercy. If there's a particular quality that we see ourselves lacking in that we'd like to develop.
You told guidance is required. So
Guidance is required, yes.
some temples like Salem we see that only Gokul Chand Prabhu is senior, is a brahmachari, so all the congregation used to guide, and some other temples we see there is counseling system. So is it good counseling?
In some temples there's only one devotee who's guiding, but that's not true. You're saying in Salem there's only Gokul who's guiding, but he told me that he doesn't even know many of the new congregation who are coming. They're being guided by others. So counseling system, yeah. That will arise naturally, or it can be instituted also. Okay, we'll finish.